I'm reading today from Rays of the One Light. These are commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita written by Swami Kriya-yoga and based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. This week's reading is entitled, "In Surrender Lies Victory." Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. A case might be made for surrender as a path to victory in worldly conflicts, the way of passive resistance in preference to armed resistance. But our point here concerns a higher kind of surrender, the surrender of our deluded egoic will to the wise and almighty will of God. As Yogananda used to say, guided by whims and limited understanding. The divine will is in harmony with every level of reality. Though the divine will sometimes appears to us at first to be wrong, it proves always eventually to be for our highest good. Human will is inconsistent. It leads us one day to success, another to disaster. The divine will, when we surrender to it completely, though it is not always easy to do, always brings us deep inner peace and joy in the end. Jesus demonstrated this perfect surrender to God's will in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he was captured and imprisoned and then crucified. He went apart from the others to pray and asked them to pray also. But when he returned to them, he found them asleep. Out of his love for them, he excused them, saying, "The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." He urged them again, saying, "Watch and pray." Their weakness in those circumstances was particularly sad, and the disciples themselves must have regretted it bitterly later on. We all know the symptoms of human weakness, though we may excuse them in ourselves, saying, "Well, after all, I'm only human." But what are the signs of true human strength? We find in all cases that these are the fruit of a life wholly surrendered to God. The Bhagavad Gita lists these signs: humbleness, truthfulness, harmlessness, patience, honor, reverence for the wise, purity, constancy, control of self, contempt for sense delights, self-sacrifice, perception of the evils inherent in mortal life, the certainty of ill in birth, old age, frail mortality, disease, the ego's suffering, and sin. Detachment, lightly holding thoughts of home, children, spouse, those ties which bind most people. An ever tranquil heart, heedless of good or adverse fortune, with the will upraised to worship me alone unceasingly. Loving deep solitude and shunning noise of foolish crowds. Calm focus on the self perceived within and in infinity. These qualities reveal true wisdom. All that is otherwise is ignorance. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. A friend sent me a joke this week that I'm going to share with you. Ramakrishna, I'm going to share your joke. So someone, a very rich man, very prosperous, died, and the angel came to him and said, "Okay, it's time to go." you're going to heaven because you've lived such a good life and you've been very generous with your great wealth. You've helped many people. So come with me, we're going to heaven. And the rich man said, well, I've heard that you can't take anything with you. And the angel said, that's right. You can't pack a suitcase and take it to heaven. And the rich man said, well, about that suitcase, do you think I could just take some small things in the suitcase with me to heaven? And they went back and forth, and the angel said, okay, you have lived a really good life. I'll take up your request with Jesus in heaven, and I'll get back to you. So the angel went up, and with Jesus they sat down and they reviewed this man's life. It was like watching a movie. There it all was, laid out, all his generosity, all his kindness. And Jesus was actually very touched. And he said, okay, tell him he can bring one suitcase. So then the man thought, oh my gosh, what can I bring? I've got these houses and boats and cars and all these things. What should I bring up to heaven? I've only got one suitcase. So he liquidated it all and he made it into gold bars, and he filled up the suitcase with gold bars. And he got up into heaven, and the angel was there with him, and they went to St. Peter, and St. Peter said, what you got in the suitcase? And he opened it up, and St. Peter goes, you brought pavement? Because the streets of heaven are lined with gold. So he brought pavement. We can't take it with us. And this reading and the affirmation that goes with it tells us that we need to transform ourselves, because we don't get to take a suitcase. All we can take are the spiritual treasures that we have garnered through our meditation practice. This beautiful reading in the Bhagavad Gita is actually quite subtle. Yogananda and Swami Kriya-yoga explain this passage, and for example, they say that humbleness, we all have an image of what humility means, but what they are saying it means is no ego. We have transcended the ego. And truthfulness means realizing that there is only one reality, that there isn't fake news and then real news and then what I believe and what you believe, and maybe there's sort of a semblance of one thing. Truth is that God is the only reality. When they speak of harmlessness, they say, the masters say, that harmlessness means that we understand that all beings are part of ourselves, that there is no separateness. So how can God want to hurt God? It creates harmlessness. Patience, that there is no time or space or movement, the masters say. So why is there waiting? Why is there hurrying? We have patience because we're in timelessness. Honor, realizing that only God deserves our courting. Only God deserves our lavishing honor on him. It's the only one. I love this one. perception of the evils inherent in all mortal life, in birth, old age, infirmary, disease, the suffering of the ego, and sin. So all of that comes when we dive beneath the vibration of duality, of good and evil, pleasure and pain, and all of that makes up this world. When we dive under that, we perceive, and I love this, for the soul, pleasure is not different essentially from pain. Both are affirmations of limitation. Isn't that wonderful? Pain and pleasure are not essentially different. They're all, to the soul, pleasure and pain are both affirmations of limitation. That's why yoga is called in the Bhagavad Gita the pain-free state. That's what we're doing all this for. That's why we're meditating. That's why we're practicing all the spiritual teachings. We're trying to get away from pain, where it doesn't touch us, where instead we're in a consciousness of bliss. The spiritual path is actually quite serious. You know, when you think about it, what we're doing today, the thoughts that we have, the feelings that we sometimes indulge in, all of those thoughts and feelings need to be purified. When we're meditating, we're not just trying to quiet the tumultuous thoughts and the rampant feelings of the heart, but we're trying to attune ourselves to this consciousness of God, of pure spirit. I will just read a few things. You know, it's such a sad story, those disciples of Jesus falling asleep and him catching them and saying, please watch and pray, help me with this. This is hard. But their eyes were heavy. And he didn't yell at them, he just begged them. But he forgave them, said the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. But that willpower to stay awake in that instance, or to do the right thing, is difficult. It's not always easy, but we need that on the spiritual path. We need to be able to do what we need to do and serve God the way He's asked us to do. So Swami offers a few suggestions for developing willpower. Never allow yourself to indulge in the no-saying principle. And we probably all know people like this. You ask them to do something, and the first thing they say is, no. I'm busy, I can't, I have this, whatever it is. The first impulse is no. Sort of like 2-year-olds that I've known. But we have to get rid of that, walk away from that no-saying principle. Swami says, say yes to life. Someone asks you to do a dance, you say yes. And then you go, oh my God, what have I done? So say yes to life, say yes to dancing. And Swami says, always look for the solutions. Be solution conscious. The solutions are out there. They are there. We just have to raise our energy to the point where we can see the solution. We have to be receptive and open to it. It must have been so agonizing well, it really was the agony in the garden for Jesus, to see that crucifixion was going to be what happened. And he asked God, let this cup pass from me, but if it is your will, I'll do it. I'll go through with it. There was no way that he could see how could this be good. And that often happens to us. We cannot imagine how this action that we are seeing we need to perform could be good. And then Jesus conquered death. He experienced the resurrection, which could not have happened if he hadn't been crucified. And so for us, we need to develop that faith that God's will is always good. And we need to develop that willpower. So another way that Master and Swami say to develop willpower is to look for the goodness in people. Don't concentrate on their faults, and don't even talk about their faults. If someone says something that is negative, don't repeat it. Let the negativity die. Don't go there. It's just not helpful. Train yourself to face life's challenges vigorously, always affirming, I can, even when your mental habits cry out in protest. Don't be ridiculous. That's a good one. Just keep affirming that you can do it. Set yourself specific tasks to accomplish, small ones at first, then increasingly challenging ones. Be sure to see each one through to completion. So challenge yourself. Try to see the goodness in people, for example. Try to say yes. Try to be willing. Try to do whatever it is. Dancing, for example. Set yourself a goal and do it. And I'm referring to the Joy-a-thon yesterday. We all did specific little things, and Joyce's little 4-year-old granddaughter asked Dharmadas to dance for the Joy-a-thon. So his partner in crime helped him, and we did something we have never done before. We danced in public. So it was nerve-wracking, but it was a challenge, and we accomplished that challenge for raising money for the church. So it was a good thing to do. So the last thing Swami invites us to work on is to keep our focus at the spiritual eye as much as you can during your waking hours. He said, Master said, this is the fastest way to know God. So if you can put your energy here and imagine your energy revolving around that space at the spiritual eye, and formulate that intensity of willpower, and pray at that point, Lord, your almighty will, united with my will, can move mountains. Don't allow yourself, as Sri Yukteswar used to say, to be kicked around by the frogs of senses. Put your willpower into practice, and you will find that God's will is behind you.
Years ago, I learned, I referenced the dance. I learned a cute phrase. You know, the old typical saying when you're wishing an actor, good luck, they would say, go break a leg. And well, what you say to a dancer is go cut a rug. So yesterday I was thinking, so in our case, cut some grass? We were outside on the lawn. Anyway, it was very sweet. This topic is an interesting one in that it's using words that we typically have a negative connotation with, or we may have a negative connotation with. Surrender sounds like you lost the war. Surrender sounds like it was a disaster and maybe you're, making trying to make a retreat out of it or something useful, but trying to, make light of it. It's interesting that word retreat, now we have a retreat center, the Forest Hermitage, and we frequently encourage people to go on retreat. And again, it sounds like you're leaving the battle. It's like you're running away. But that word has some interesting other potential meanings. The word treat especially has a number of meanings. One of them, of course, is how you treat someone, how you behave towards someone. So you could think of retreating as kind of assessing your behavior. That would be another way to look at it. But there's another angle to it. The word treat, coming to older English, who will treat with me? In other words, who will make a treaty with me? Who will discuss? Who will negotiate? Who will decide? If you think of that in yourself, retreating means renegotiating or reassessing. And this touches on what Nirmala was saying, reminding ourselves of our true center, our true home. This concept that pleasure and pain are both affirmations of lack or of limitation is one that does not automatically come naturally to us, I think, because the ice cream sounds really good. It tastes really good. It's like, pleasure, all the little synapses start firing inside and it's like, yippee! And of course, the pain that follows it, the discomfort that follows it is not much fun, but they can often be far enough apart that we don't make the correlation between the pleasure and the pain. But they are just the ocean moving up and down on one side or the other. And we're looking for that center. We're looking for that place in the center that we can find peace, we can find centeredness. And Swamiji exemplified this beautifully for us. And we got to watch it play out in real time because things would come up in his life. He would feel the guidance to do something, and the something was almost always very challenging. And I can remember a number of times where we were with him in a social way. We were just over having tea, or we were, there was going to be a movie, or there was going to be some birthday party, or some very innocuous, simple thing. And his energy was very, very centered and very inward. And it looked a little stern. It looked a little grave, you could say. And he wasn't being mean, he wasn't being annoyed, he wasn't being anything in particular. He was just realizing the gravity of the situation. A specific example, he wrote the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, and it just poured through him. It's like he had spent 50 years, 55, 60 years preparing to write this book. When the time came to write it, it just was like download, just boom, it just came out. 10 pages a day, 60 days, 600 pages, 3 more weeks to edit it, boom, it was published. It was going into print. Well, the next book, or one of the next books, was Revelations of Christ. Well, that was not a book he had been preparing for 60 years to write. And that's what came to him the night that we were at this little engagement. And it was like, oh, this is going to be a workout. This is going to be intense. And, all of us are looking, you're singing happy birthday and you got cake and it's like, this is fun, this is a fun day here. And he's just like, we were, you wonder if somebody stepped on his foot it just was like, it's a very serious moment. And yet we had learned, you just watch, you just see. And I'd like to suggest to all of us, you could correlate this to the suggestions Nirmala read that Swami wrote, suggestions for how to develop willpower. This is more of a how to learn to be in tune with, or how to transcend all of the human conditions that are always changing, always going up and down. What if, just ask yourself this question, what if whatever happened was going to be okay? The team wins or the team loses. Your team wins the World Series or never even made the playoffs. Whatever it may be, your health is fine, your health is not so good. Whatever it may be, all of the things that could happen, what if it was all going to be okay? Why? Not because you just sort of ignore it or grit your teeth or whatever, but because God's presence is always inextricably, irretrievably with us. It's impossible to be separate from God. That's how Christ could look at this experience. It's interesting, Nirmala was saying, that's sort of known as the night of agony, or the agony of Gethsemane. It is said that he sweated blood. He literally perspired blood, which is humanly possible to do. It's not a very fun thing to do. It's like the most intense awareness and difficulty, stress can produce that response. He knew that God would be with him. Even if on a human level, he on some level didn't understand why it had to go this way. But if that's what it has to be, if I have to get nailed to a cross, it's going to be okay because you're going to be with me the whole way. That's a pretty extreme example. But if we could just look at this world and all the tension and all the, there was just a huge hurricane that just messed up 4 states. There's another storm brewing down there in the Caribbean, looks like it's headed towards Florida. Is it any wonder? Human consciousness is a little disturbed right now. And we may think, oh, well, what's my meditation got to do with anything? Our meditation is extremely important in creating peace and harmony. And we may think, oh, well, but I'm just one little person among how many billion? But relative to us, it makes an enormous difference. And it's amazing and astonishing when we actually look at the ripple effect, which has been studied statistically. It makes a remarkable difference. The tiniest fraction of a city meditating can change the consciousness of that whole city. Swami used to say that in order to own or sort of be able to direct a large public company, you don't have to literally have 51% of the shares. You have to literally have like 5% of the shares. Why? Because everybody else cancels each other out. And your 5% would be enough to swing the whole thing in the direction that you're looking for. We don't have to understand everything that could possibly be. But if we can stay in tune, get in tune, retreat, reassess, reorganize, look for that stillness. I can't help but quote one of the lines from the Bhagavad Gita. Having, as I think many of you know, been a sports fan for much of my life, that line, there's this one line, these little lines come up once a year, and this particular week is the week where the line comes up, shunning noise of foolish crowds. Now, is there any better example of the noise of a foolish crowd than a stadium crammed with 100,000 people screaming and yelling and painting themselves wild colors and, jumping up and down and stomping and, being thrilled, being absolutely devastated, etc. I mean, that's the perfect example. We don't shun the noise of foolish crowds because they are bad people. We shun them shun it because there is more joy inside. We had a silence retreat a week ago yesterday, and it was just marvelous, just wonderful. And or 2 weeks ago, anyway, whatever it was, just to dive into that inwardness and to have it and realize that it's like having this ocean liner plowing through the ocean, and the waves are going to do whatever they're going to do. The wind is going to do whatever it's going to do. But it's just like, no, I've charted my course. This is where I'm going. And Swamiji was like that. When he felt that God was telling him to do something, he just would do that. He would just head in that direction. And he would always check. He would always ask people, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And he would listen. Rare quality. He would listen. He didn't sort of pre-prime, but you really think this, he honestly wanted to know, what do people think? What is their response? So often we go through life, someone's talking, and we're busy thinking, but I really want to say this. I really want them to hear this. Well, okay, fine. But if we can't listen when someone's talking, then we're not going to be prepared to actually say what they could hear when the time comes for that to happen. And that's what this surrender retreat little dynamic is about. It's not running away, it's getting still enough to be effective with what we can actually do in life. I'm, of course, reminded of the famous serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things that I can't change, the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, when we can change what we can actually change, to really sort of bring it down to common denominators, what we can change is what's inside of ourselves. And yes, okay, we can have some minimal impact on the world outside of us, but we can't, on the street corner, hollering at people, we cannot change people very much, but we can change ourselves. And if we have the courage to do that, then that can ripple out into the world and be very powerful. And wisdom to know the difference means there's a whole lot that we can't change. There's a fair bit that we can on the inside, and let's keep track. Let's do the accounting work so that we understand, yes, that is something I can change. I can change my behavior. I can change my reaction so that I don't react, I respond. And that's a very different thing. Responding means God is saying, let's do this. It's not knee-jerk. It's I actually feel in the calmness of my heart, this is what needs to be done, and I'm jolly well going to do it, even if it means learning how to waltz. God bless. It's God's green earth, it's not yours, it's not mine. It's a legacy given to all. It's ours to enjoy, to love, to improve, but never ours to destroy. It's God's green earth, may we never despair, for the hatred so many express. The tension they know is wisdom's stern way of teaching those who transgress. Some men hate, some love, how little they see. The fruits they reap are the same. Hate all, you reap hatred. Love all, you reap love. The joy is yours or the pain. It's God's green earth, it's not yours, it's not mine. It's a legacy given to all. It's ours to enjoy, to keep, to improve, but never ours to destroy.